and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 97th New Social Environment. I'm Lewis, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation between Nathaniel Dorsky and Constance Lewallen. We're also thrilled to have the poet Patricia Spears Jones here, who will read to close today's program. And now to introduce today's host. Constance Lewallen is a curator at the University of California, Berkeley Art Museum and Pacific Film Archive. Her exhibitions include Joe Brainerd, a retrospective, A Rose Has No Teeth, Bruce Nauman in the 1960s, Alan Ruppersberg, You and Me, or The Art of Give and Take, State of Mind, New California Art, circa 1970, co-curated with Karen Moss, Mind Over Matter, and her most recent project, co-curated with Ted Mann, Stephen Kaltenbach, The Beginning and the End, which debuted at the Manetti Shrem Museum, UC Davis. Her recent books, published by UC Press, include 500 Cap Street, David Ireland's House, and Bruce Nauman, Spatial Encounters, co-authored with Dor Bowen. Lewallen is an editor-at-large for the Brooklyn Rail. Over to you, Connie.
Thank you, Lewis, and thank Fong and his wonderful team at the Brooklyn Rail, Nick, Catherine, I know I'm going to forget people, Charlie, who are doing a most amazing job in keeping us all informed and engaged during this crisis. I'm going to give a brief introduction to our guest, Nathaniel Dorsky. Everyone knows him as Nick, who was born in New York. He moved to San Francisco in 1971. He has received so many awards, the Guggenheim, the Rockefeller, the Foundation for Contemporary Arts, the LEF Foundation, the California Arts Council. His films have been presented at MOMA, at the Centre Pompidou, at the Tate in London, in Spain, at the Filmoteca, at the Prague Film Archive, on and on. He was given a retrospective at the Lincoln Center in the Film Festival, New York Film Festival in 2015. And Manohla Dargis of the New York Times listed this retrospective in second place in her list of the top 10 films of 2015. So before I bring Nick into this conversation, let me just read a very nice paragraph that was written by Steve Polta at the San Francisco Cinematheque, which kind of gives you a sense of what Dorsky's films are like. The films of Nathaniel Dorsky blend a beauteous celebration of the sensual world with a deep sense of introspection and solitude. There are occasions for reflection and meditation on light, landscape, time, and the motions of consciousness. Their luminous photography emphasizes the elemental frisson between solidity and luminosity, between spirit and matter, while his uniquely developed montage permits a fluid and flowing experience of time. Dorsky's films reveal the mystery behind everyday existence, providing intimations of eternity. Nick, you are known as an experimental filmmaker. Can you tell us what that means to you? Can you define experimental film for our audience?
Well, yes, of course, you would never call a painter an experimental painter. They would just be a painter. In the realm of cinema or film, it's very similar to literature. In literature, there'd be no problem if someone were introduced as a poet as opposed to a novelist or a dramatist. And the same in film, because of economic considerations, the narrative structure, film based on novel or film based on theater, became the dominant use of film because there's, for one thing, it was supportable with cash return, recoupment, and so forth. And at the same time that all that was going on, there were also people who were working with excuse me, it's a little hard to talk. I don't know who I'm talking to. How to say it? So in film, it's very, there's also people who are poets in a sense, are more poets or painters, let's say, than dramatists or novelists. Though I love all types of film very much, and I've worked on all kinds of film, my own work is, I guess it's been called in the realm of what's called experimental film, which really means film, I think, that's closer to painting and closer to poetry than it is to theater or drama, in short. And the whole lineage of, and I'm, in a way, in terms of an American, maybe in the broader sense, what you might call the third generation. The first generation was basically in the 40s with people like Maya Deren and so forth. And then you have the next very renegade generation, very courageous people like Stan Brakhage and so forth. And then came my generation. And what's interesting, I think, is that my generation was the last generation to learn about experimental film outside of college. In other words, when I was 18 or 19, the idea that you would show an experimental film out of college was a radical kind of event. Now it's, now you can get a doctorate in anything. So,
oh, I forgot to mention that you were a doctor.
a film doctor.
A film.
Yes, don't bring me your ailments, please. Okay.
Well, no, I know you mentioned that you did have some brief training in formal training, but mostly self-taught. Is that right?
Yes, I went to Antioch. I attended Antioch College for a year, and fortunately, they had no film department. Well, very few colleges at that point in the early 60s had film departments. It would be NYU and UCLA, USC. But there was a film club, a cine club, where you could take out a 16mm camera, and there were seniors who were very good at it. And so I arranged some private tutorials and stopped going to classes, basically. And just began to go out with the 16 camera. I was just enthralled. I had started when I was younger. When I was 10 or 11, I made a number of 8mm films about animals in the neighborhood, things like that. And, but it just, I don't know, I feel so fortunate because in a way I'm a little bit of an outlier, and there's something, I don't know, I'm so happy I have something I can relate to that the world can also relate to. That it's a connect. For me, it's an umbilical cord of some sort, some kind of a way to survive and be nourished in society.
Well, let's talk about your first major film, which is called Hours for Jerome, which is also, I think, even now your longest film. Is that right?
No, well, there's the film, of course, there's a 2.5-hour film I finished 2 years ago.
Yeah.
The Arboretum Cycle. But
Catherine, excuse me,
yes,
Catherine, you can put on some of the first 3 slides, right? These first 3 images are from that film, Hours for Jerome. Yes. Continue, Nick, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Well, Hours, see the salamander, the window. I love that it has like portholes, lit windows at night, and of a plane or a train. But they don't have those salamanders in California. They just have brown ones. Anyway, what is the question again, dear?
No, I was just saying that we're talking about your first major film, this one, which was made, well, actually, we edited in 1982, but I think that the footage is footage that you made when you were living with Jerry, your partner, in a rural part of New Jersey. Is that right?
Well, yeah, yes. Well, actually, when I was 20, I made when I was 19 or 20, I was very taken by the screenings of the American Avant-Garde, and the screenings were very exciting and very revolutionary. And I went and I made 3 sound films, but after that, I wanted very much to see if I could make a silent film, because at least the gang I hung out with in that arena, we all admired silent cinema because of a certain need to actually articulate visually if it's silent. so that the silence led to a more detailed silent articulation. So I shot film for a long time, Hours for Jerome, over maybe 5 years, and didn't edit it. I edited sections, and some of the final film has some sections I edited then, but I put it away. I wasn't having kind of emotional problems at that time, my early 20s. It was a rough patch, as people say nowadays. And I moved out to California and just put all the cans of film on a high shelf in my editing room. And one day around, I guess it was around 1980, was this 15 years later, 12 years later, I don't know what, a friend, poet Larry Fagan, who's no longer living, was visiting. And I said, Larry, had you ever seen the films that I took at this Lake Owasso? It's a lake in New Jersey near Port Jervis, near the Delaware River. You ever seen the footage from that period? He said no. So I went up on a ladder and got down literally these dusty, rusty cans and opened them up and started to project the raw footage, which then became Hours for Jerome. And we looked at this, and it was like a treasure chest, a joke. I mean, sometimes I look over at my shelves of records and think of how much genius and hard work and beauty is in these discs, you know. And so it was to suddenly find all this footage and realize there was a movie there, and I could see the footage beyond my own depression at the time, and that once I edited that film, took a year or so. Everything began to open up and loosen up for me.
Let me ask you a question about the fact that this is a film that's made with 18 frames per second, which is not what we're used to in commercial cinema, which is 24. So tell me what the difference is and why you prefer shooting at 18 rather than 24.
Well, narrative film traditionally was not shot at 24 frames a second before the sound era.
Yeah.
And for the sound to have a better fidelity, the film had to go faster. It had to go 24 frames a second. And so that became the standard based on sound. So if you're making a silent film, you have no obligation to 24 frames per second. And what's normally in film called silent speed, which could either be 16 to 18 frames a second. I think Warhol shows those films at 16. Not the sound films, I mean like just the camera tests and so forth. But the 18 frames a second just allows for more detailing. You can see more. It's also much more gentle. The 24 frames a second, is, to actually have a projector in a room that's going on 24 frames per second is a little, it feels graspy. I actually can feel the engine, you know, pulling the film through the projector, where the 18 frames per second feels more like a cat purring. You know, it's a little more relaxed. It's not desperately clawing at your pants like some cats do.
How does this relate to the editing form that you use, which has been called polyvalent or open form?
No, it's a whole nother world
Okay.
of questioning.
Okay.
The point is, I project my films at 18 frames per second. This is not unusual within the American avant-garde. It's more gentle. It's closer to the threshold of the transparency and the illusion of the film. There's more gap between each shot, between each frame rather, a slightly longer pause and so forth. The nature of polyvalence is a whole nother subject, often called open montage. What I was interested in with the Hours for Jerome was to make a film which was a succession of sequences, but those sequences wouldn't support the solidity of a narrative. Excuse me if I'm not speaking so well. I'm not used to. I'm just talking to a blank laptop. I feel it takes a little bit getting used to. So I was interested in a kind of a montage based on I had an intuition. John Ashbery had just written Rivers and Mountains and had done Tennis Court Oath. And I was visiting a friend who was a poet, and he showed me this new book of John Ashbery's. And I think we had gotten very stoned, and I was just picked it up and was reading it quite slowly. And just at that point, I had a revelation. It was just a response to John's genius. So I wondered if you could make a film where every shot cut to the next shot only for its own needs, rather than the needs to describe something beyond film, like a scene, a place, or have some kind of collective meaning. It was more, could a film go forward by taking, with each cut would be a leap in another direction, but at the same time, that other direction had to have poetic resonance underneath. And it's a whole long discussion. It became the basis of about 20 films I made after Hours for Jerome.
Yeah, maybe, Catherine, we could just start showing a couple of the other images. It's interesting you mentioned John Ashbery. As you may have known, it was his birthday the other day, and there was a wonderful—
Yes, we have the same birthday.
Yes, and there was a tribute to him on the rail, presented by the rail, which was really wonderful. So poetry, I mean, your films have often been described as poetic. I'm not exactly sure how you feel about that, and what you think that means in terms of your films, and also in terms of poetry. Is there a poetry that you read today that's important to you, that in some way informs your filmmaking?
That's a lot. Well, no, I don't mind my films being called poetic. There's a difference between what you might call poetic narrative, or there's certain narrative filmmakers are considered quite poetic. So I'm not quite using it in that term, in that sense. That sense of poetic is a little bit more. Oh gosh, it's hard to say. I'm looking at the shoe. I'm sorry. You know what happens is you put the shoe up, and I'm just sort of staring at this shoe.
You were talking
as
about—
far as
yeah,
no, I understand what we're talking. So as far as what I read today, I read today a lot about fairly ancient Chinese poetry.
Oh.
I've always loved poetry from like the Tang and the Song, the early dynasties, and that always touched me the most. And they're contemporary, or not contemporary. No one's I don't know who's alive anymore. The George Oppen I like very much, and that's a whole nother topic. I'm sorry.
Okay, we don't have to continue in that vein, but what we're looking at now is we're looking at some films that followed Hours from Jerome. So maybe we can do the next one.
Yeah, the film that you have up, there's a film, there's a picture from, it's a film called Trieste, which was the first, after Hours for Jerome, I made a number of single subject films, one on sand and one on film grain. But Trieste was the first time where I took all these scraps from many unfinished or unsuccessful projects over about a 15-year period, because I was still struggling. And it's the first time I think I completely manifested the polyvalent thesis, so to speak, where each shot went to the next shot, for some kind of, it was meaningful, but not, it didn't have meaning as such, but it was more meaningful. So you're working more with the gaps and synapses between things. You're activating what was missing between things at the same time. So Trieste was the first film I really did that in a very rigorous way.
So this one, what's the next one, Catherine?
Well, that's from Hours for Jerome.
That is, oh, sorry.
No, it's variations. I don't have the last.
Yeah, I didn't think so.
I'm the last person.
This is one of the films that you made subsequent to Hours for Jerome. I think the date is 92 to 98. And this is the one, Variation, so we're not seeing it here in this image, but isn't this the one, Nick, where you had that wonderful image of the plastic bag sort of being buffeted by the wind?
Yes.
And then that was somehow picked up by Sam Mendes and used in his film, which was that film. Where is it? Oh, American Beauty. Is that right? Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah, it's right. I think I don't know what the real truth of it is. I know that I got a very nice review in the Times for Variations, and I think the opening is at the New York Film Festival. I think the opening sentence was, "Can you imagine a more beautiful cinematic image than a plastic bag blowing around in the wind," and so forth. And all I know is about half a year later, American Beauty came out, and it was about an experimental poetic video maker who took a picture of a plastic bag. But you know, that trope is such a given. If you want to know the truth, I almost didn't use that image because I thought it's a little too common. But there's a lot of people, even Ozu did a beautiful thing with blowing newspapers.
Ozu?
Yeah. What did I say?
Ozu, did you say?
Yeah, Ozu in, oh boy. The film, it's amazing, I can't remember it. Oh, Hen in the Wind, I'm sorry. In Hen in the Wind, he did a beautiful thing with blowing newspapers, and various other people who did city symphonies, I think. Yeah, so a lot of people made a big deal of it, but I didn't take it too seriously as something that was copied from me. You know, I think it's just in the air, so to speak.
In the air.
Yes.
Yes. So what is the next image, Catherine? So Nick, this is from?
I think that's from Variations.
This is also from Variations. Do you want to talk about Variations at all?
Well, yeah, sure. It's interesting. I had made Trieste, and it took me about 5 years to edit it, and to learn how the polyvalence would work. The difficult thing with polyvalence is it has to open up, at the same time it has to reinforce. So there has to be this openness from one kind of image to another, but at the same time there has to be something evocative about it, some kind of mood established, some kind of sense of meaning in a most general sense. So Trieste, I was trying to do that with footage that wasn't shot for that particular purpose. They were just scraps, leftovers, projects, as I said. So what happened is I got in a terrible auto accident, a head-on collision. Wasn't my fault, and but I got a really bad concussion. I mean, really bad, and so the only thing I couldn't enjoy conversation, hearing people talk, or anything. I could enjoy having a little smoke and going out with my camera and just wandering silently. And I was putting the camera up to my face and looking at the world a little bit the way I looked at the world in Trieste, which was slightly with what I would call an avant-garde attitude. There's this like attitude, which is of avant-garde, which is sort of alienated, you know, distant, so forth. It was during the Reagan years and so forth. And so I began to question, well, why did I originally like to take pictures of make movies when I was a kid, when I was 10? And it was because I loved the world and I wanted to show the world to people. So my whole attitude changed, because to look through the camera with an avant-garde attitude and have a concussion was a very unpleasant experience. But to look through the camera with a sense of love was very pleasant for the concussion. So the Variations was all shot, recovering from this concussion. And I began to shoot more in a way that was appropriate for the polyvalent editing.
Well, Variations and the film that follows, the next slide, Catherine, which is this one from Variations also, right?
Variations, yes.
And then the next one is from
Arbor Vitae.
Arbor Vitae, which followed. But before we get to that, I mean, several like Variations and Threnody, which we haven't looked at yet, have the same title as some of Balanchine's ballets. And I know that you are a big fan of Balanchine. And can you talk a little bit about why that Balanchine is so important to you and how that relates to these films in particular?
I don't know if I can say how it relates to these films in particular, but well, ballet, or Balanchine's ballet, which is something in itself, is an art form which takes place in time. It has to do with a visual presentation which unfolds in time. And he's a supreme genius, one of those geniuses which goes beyond 1 or 2 centuries. And to watch one of his ballets is, I find, deeply healthy in the way that the energy unfolds. And so I don't know, I love him as many people do.
Right. What is the next slide, Catherine? This is from Nick?
I think that's from Love's Refrain.
Yeah, I think you're right. Before we get to the next group of slides, which relate to this sort of magnum opus that's been called your Arboretum Cycle, you made several of these films that we've been looking at: Threnody, Song and Solitude, Obad, Summer. And some of these are actually commemorating friends who were dying and so forth. Is that the case? I know Song and Solitude was made when one of your close friends was quite ill.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It's a little hard for me to jump around so much. Yes, I made one film when George Kuchar was dying. Called August and After, and another film called Song and Solitude. A dear friend, Susan Vigil, was very important in the San Francisco experimental film scene, and she died. Well, then that Threnody was when Stan died.
Brackage.
Yeah, all these things happened kind of just spontaneously. I went to make, Stan had died, I went to pick up my Bolex, the world felt different. And so I said, the only film I can make is some kind of tribute to him. Also in medieval early Renaissance music, I've always loved a piece by Josquin called The Declaration on the Death of Ockeghem. And Ockeghem was a previous composer to Josquin. I always loved that piece of music. It's so gorgeous. And I think that inspired me very much. The idea of a composer, writing a piece of music in dedication to a colleague or someone in their lineage that had died. Yeah.
Let's see what the next one is, Catherine. What is this one from, Nick?
That's also Love's Refrain.
What's interesting is, I mean, a lot of the imagery in your films derives from nature. You spend a lot of time shooting in nature,
Yeah.
but that's not all of it. And even maybe more lately, you know, there are images of people, or of cars, or of, you know, restaurants, people eating in a restaurant, and so forth. So do you think I think you mentioned to me that in your next film, or the films you're working on now, there is more figurative aspects than before. Is that right?
Well, I'm pulled in both directions. You know, I guess like a painter's must be pulled between the all over and figurative. You know, there's something about the depth of cosmic humanity that can be expressed in the all over. I'm using all over in a very all over sense. And and then drawn toward figure. You know, even I think Pollock in his last days wasn't he adding figures back into the all over. So it's a difficult marriage. So I just finished, the last film I finished is every shot. A friend of mine who's very supportive of my films, his son is studying to be an actor. And we went out with some black and white 16mm film in the Golden Gate Park during the lockdown now, and shot a beautiful little 12-minute film. And every shot is of him. And so that film is, you know, completely figurative. The films before that were more all over. I think they're just two different ways to touch humanity. I've always noticed, like Picasso, of course, whom I love, respect very, very much, understatement. I think Picasso was one of the few painters who could paint the psyche and form in the same painting. I mean, a lot of painters, they can paint form, but if there's a figure in the form, you don't really sense who the person is. They're still more like a visual object. Where Picasso always had the psyche completely manifest as psyche, and the form completely manifest as form in the same situation. So I'm torn also that way, you know, toward the sort of compassionate, tender view of a human face, you know, that kind of power, or the power of form itself, form and light and time.
Catherine, can you move along? What is this one from, Nick?
Oh, that's from a film called The Visitation.
Right. I'd like to, you know, just in the interest of time, if we can start scrolling a little more advanced. When we get to the Arboretum Cycle, Nick, let me know.
Okay.
Okay, next one, Catherine.
That was from Threnody. I don't know if this is that interesting to an audience. That was the one we just saw was from Threnody, the one for State Brackage. And here's a situation where I was walking down the street and I saw this fortune teller had just moved into a storefront and had just thrown all their stuff haphazardly into the window. They hadn't set it up yet. And I happened to walk along, and then I saw this bust, dying or dead, falling over. So I took that shot. Said, "Oh, that would be an interesting film. I mean, an interesting image for a film commemorating someone's death."
Yeah. Continue, Catherine. There.
And is that Song in Solitude? Yeah, I think so. I used to know my films really well, and now there are too many of them, and I'm too old, and I can't remember them all. But Song in Solitude was done for Susan.
Yes.
This is I love this one. Very chiaroscuro, very almost Caravaggio, not in its sense of dimension, but maybe in its color, its colors and so forth.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Mm.
I mean, I've seen a lot of your films, Nick. It's very hard for me to also to look at an image and say that's from that film.
Yeah.
I mean, and we had a funny situation where Nick and I were trying to make sure that we had the titles of the images and the images in the right order. And Nick, you couldn't get your PowerPoint to work, so I had to do it by description. So I said, well, this one's kind of green and there's a little bit of blur, and then, you know, and it just became kind of a sort of absurdity. But anyway, yeah, let's keep going.
But this is well, oh, that's in Paris. That's in front of a movie, a tree, a spring tree. You can, I don't know, you can vaguely see it's turning green, yellow, green, spring green. And that's against an electronic sign in Paris.
That is?
Yeah. Yeah. The previous one, I was working more and more with trying to get a sense of 3D out of the 2-dimensional screen. You know, so I was working a lot with it, and the stills are just kind of stills. The film is a film which is alive in time and is moving through things, and is more like dance. It's holding a certain pattern, releasing, and so forth. But the stills are just these are like snapshots of yourself. You know, there could be a nice snap of yourself, but it's not really yourself. But I was been working hard on getting the screen to be very 3-dimensional. And like this is an example. So I began to focus. When you take a shot, there's normal conservative ideas where you would focus when you're taking a shot. Is it on the foreground, the background, whatever? You would choose something that has some logic. So I began to shoot more and more in ways where the point of focus was not in a normal, predictable place. It would be in an odd place. Like you can see where it's sharp, is somewhere between two areas of soft focus.
That's right.
Mm.
And that's the one you said was shot in Paris.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's continue. Oh,
This is shot. This is. I don't know if this is interesting to go through slides and say what things are, but this is a window of a gymnasium in the Castro district of San Francisco. I was peeking in with my camera. No, and there's 2 layers. They had a glass, they had regular glass, and behind that they had one of those things I used to only see in the 40s in store windows, those amber plastic shades which come down to block the sun. You know, they're very 40s. Anyway, this place had those. So there's a double layer of reflection. There's the hard level off the glass, and then there's a softer, more fluid amber level off the plastic behind it.
but you're telling us this, and it's interesting because in looking at this, one would not know what it is. I mean, you know what it is, but for for me or anybody else, I think it looks like, for me, it looks like, a tree, and, it looks more natural or from nature.
Well, it is a tree. Yeah, no, it's definitely a reflection of a tree and clouds. You can see some of the clouds.
In the window.
Yeah.
Do you have your camera with you most of the time when you're walking around, or are you specifically going out to shoot on a particular day, or are you with your
It's both. It's both. I always, the box is quite heavy. And as you've gotten older, it's get heavier. I think it's 7.5 pounds with I weighed it once at the UPS store. I said, how much does this weigh? And yes, I sort of keep the camera around as much as I can, because it's very hard to go back and shoot something you saw. Everything changes, the weather and everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's keep going, Catherine.
Oh, what is that? Oh dear, what film is that?
Could it be Obad?
No, I think that's August and After.
Ah, okay.
So
There should be
a lot. That's That's in a Tiffany's window. I think a Tiffany in San Francisco. Is that Tiffany's on Union Square?
Used to be.
Yeah,
Yeah.
used to be. Oh. Anyway, so this is they used to have very nice windows. When I was a little kid, when I was 5 or 6, and my parents would take me into New York every Saturday. We'd go to the Museum of Modern Art, and I loved looking in the windows on Fifth Avenue. And so I had 2 professions of choice at 6. I wanted to either be a window dresser, or which was to make my parents nervous, and then an engineer, because I love the bridges around Manhattan. And so I was drawn between being an engineer and a window dresser. I ended up being an experimental filmmaker.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, yeah. And you can see here that there's someone. This is a complicated shot. Those leaves on the border are on the surface of the glass. And then that locket, you can actually see me in the locket with the camera a little bit. There's a locket, and then there was someone walking by in that kind of zigzag blue. And anyway, the point is that I try to take images. The point of all this is that I try to take images which don't instantly, can't be instantly replaced by a verbal idea or by a word. If when I see I try not to shoot objects. So that here's an object, and there's a word attached to that object, and that object has certain meanings and associations. I try to take shots that when the moment you see them, your mind can't, you don't know what it is. And in a certain way, I'm trying to very, very gently force people into having a more direct sense of vision, rather than using their eyes as an excuse for language. I mean, I think it's the biggest revelation, or one of the bigger revelations you can have in life, is the moment as you stop seeing the world as language. As the objects have names and they mean something, and when you start to just see the world directly. And I think the strength of my films, I think, has to do with that over a period of time, you're slowly massaged into a more direct experience of being alive and seeing, rather than one that's representative of something. You know.
Catherine? Yeah, I love this one. I'm trying to get to the Arboretum Cycle, which I think begins with with image number.
Then what's going to happen once we get there?
Yeah, I think it starts with, where am I now? 25, maybe. Or 26. I can't tell. You tell me, Nick, when we get to it.
Okay, I'll scream, I'll faint. Oh, this is from Oaxaca.
Yeah.
Oh, there are a number of films. I have 4 films which I never printed. They were shot on Kodachrome. Look how gorgeous the Kodachrome is. So I have 4 films, and at the Anthology Film Archive in New York last autumn, or some autumn before COVID, sort of remember, I showed 2 of them. I'd like to show the other 2. Well, this one was shot all in Oaxaca during 2 visits there. And what it is, I went to print it, and I realized that when I printed it, it went dead. That the original Kodachrome, the beauty of the films were that they were in original Kodachrome. Once you printed the Kodachrome, the real essence, the real juice, the eros of the footage was just flattened out toward information. So I decided never to print them and just show them occasionally in special situations where they have a great projector like the Anthology. Show them as alive, real things. Anyway, this is on an old train in Oaxaca that used to go from Oaxaca to Ocatlan every Friday morning at 7:30 and fill up completely with animals and people carrying huge sacks of grains, and it was extraordinary. Wonderful. And this is another one from that Kodachrome series. These are two travel films called Lux Perpetua, the one in Oaxaca, and then this is Jerome being lit actually by a church. I forget the name of it, in Paris, up in Montmartre, up at the top of that stairway to Montmartre. I forget the name of that church. But Jerry and I are huge fans of medieval glass. In fact, we went to Europe a number of times and have like 2,000 slides of glass between the years of 1150 to maybe 1350.
And that I really think that comes through in this image. You know, it suggests that kind of color and light that you see in stained glass. And I know Jerry in particular is really very knowledgeable about stained glass and the history of it, and thinks of it in a way as a sort of medieval version of film?
Yes, but yeah, it's definitely the grandma of cinema, the stained glass, in terms of storytelling, in terms of luminosity, in terms of prayer, and what it offers the human psyche.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, of course, Jerry's being lit by stained glass here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Next one, Catherine. So, are we at Arboretum now?
No. Oh, yes.
Yes.
We are.
Yes. Okay. I want to make sure that we really talk about this series. This is the Arboretum Cycle, which is a major work consisting of 7 short films. And what ties them together in a way is that they were all shot in the Arboretum at Golden Gate Park. And Nick lives right across the street from Golden Gate Park and spends a lot of time there with his camera. In fact, I remember one time taking a walk there with my husband, and we heard some rustling, and we looked down, and there was Nick on the ground underneath a bush with his camera. Hi, Nick. But this is what Bill wrote. Nick goes out for walks and regularly brings his Bolex camera with him on how he points and prods the camera, crawls into unlikely spaces, inspects things, people, weather, streets, sky, plant life, and qualities of light in places like the Arboretum in Golden Gate Park, Chinatown, the avenues, and other city neighborhoods. Most of them are within walking distance of home. Golden Gate Park, for those who don't know, is sort of the Central Park of San Francisco. In fact, it was inspired by Central Park. And it's true, you have spent an inordinate amount of time in there. And this cycle, as I said, is all based on imagery from Golden Gate Park. You want to talk about this a little bit?
Yeah, this is a very special film. I have been doing the polyvalent, which you could say, starting with Trieste, and all those films, maybe 20 or 25 of them. I don't even know anymore. And they're all, in a way, a continuity of the various, because the polyvalence is bringing together various things to make some other deeper kind of meaning. And actually, P. Adam Sidney, an important writer of American experimental film, said to me once, why don't you make a film about one subject? I said, well, it has to be a very good subject. I always had that, I was haunted by that challenge, so to speak. So I had made films earlier, one called Alia, it's all about sand, about a half an hour. I love that film. I haven't seen it in years. But anyway, I began to do my research for this film by going to the park every day. And at that time, I was making up I know it sounds very decadent, but it's who I am. Making up a nice brew of cannabis and ghee and butter and so forth as an edible. And I was going to the park for about a week, and to the Arboretum, and I realized that I wanted to make a film there, but you can't make a garden film seem like so. Take pictures of pretty flowers or something. It wasn't going to really go anywhere. But I thought what I want to shoot really is the light on the plants, not the plants. So I would never like frame toward making the plant an object and taking a picture of it. But it was much more of a feeling of being immersed in some kind of deeper level of nature photography, where you activated some deep DNA sense of nature, more than, let's say, a decorative sense of flowers. So I love the flowers.
Let's move through a few of these images, Catherine. Yeah, from Arboretum. Another one, I think, too, and maybe even another one. Yes. So is it true that these were shot over almost a year's time?
Yes. What happened is I started the first. We had a drought for about 5 years in California. It was terrible, and then one October, November, when rainy season begins, it really began to pour. It was fantastic. It was like biblical. It was so wonderful to have all that rain falling. But it inspired out of Mother Nature a spring, an extraordinary spring, where the plants seemed so happy and everything was so, I don't know, just gorgeous. And so I made this film in San Francisco. Early spring begins in January there, San Francisco. And so I shot a half-hour film, almost a half hour, called Elohim. And as soon as I finished that, I walked out into the park and I realized, oh, now it's a little further along, and that's not early spring, now it's middle spring. So I shot, anyway, it ended up making 7 films that went all the way around the year. And the last one being in late December, January. I think the one that's up there now is from that last one called Epilogue, which I think is very tender, beautiful film. I really got, it was a holy time for me. I was just in this kind of trance. I guess a trance of eros, that the whole garden I don't know, it just became part of me. And when new colors were introduced as the months went by, the reds came in and all this. I don't know, it was just like a wonderful period. And so there's this 2.5 hour film made of 7 sections, which I don't know, I'm crazy about. It's really a wonder. You can't tell from the stills, it's all very active, the film. Seems to be getting brighter and darker and so forth.
Let's see the next one. Yeah.
Yeah, that's also from that.
Yeah. You've talked about the transformative power of watching a film. And I know that that's certainly one of the things that inspired you to begin to make films in even when you were a child. But you wrote a book that's become kind of a classic. It's called Devotional Cinema. And I think it's in, I don't know, it's 7th printing or something like that. And, you know, I'd like to talk a little bit about that film because I think it really does encapsulate your philosophy of filmmaking and film. And so let's talk about that a little bit. The name, for one thing, you said came from walking around the Art Institute of Chicago. So let's begin with that.
Well, yeah, actually, yes, I was invited to show films at the Art Institute, and I had a free day and they give you a pass to the museum, and I was in the middle of of writing devotional cinema, without that name being what it was. At any rate, I noticed that they called certain objects in the museum devotional, like a devotional panel. You know, there might be an Italian painting on wood and so forth. Or the Italians had something called the tavola, which I guess means table, which were those 3-piece shrines that would fold up and then open. It's like having a laptop for prayer. And you could open it up and set it on a table. And they call it devotional portrait or devotional. And then I just said, oh, I'm going to call the book Devotional Cinema, which I knew was kind of odd, and also using the word devotional in a modern context is strange for people, but I thought that could be interesting because I did mean it. And that book was a wonderful, it came from years of the plan. I didn't know I was going to be writing a book. It came from planning a course I was teaching at Berkeley. And then, the book, I had wonderful help. The Museum of Modern Art gave me I think $1,000 to convert well, I'm sorry, I'm going so many different things to say. It came from a lecture. It came from actually 2 lectures. One I gave at Stanford and one at Princeton. And the Museum of Modern Art liked the text, and then they gave me $1,000 to turn the spoken text into a written text because it's a different kind of style. Though I tried to keep the book conversational and heartfelt rather than academic in a way. I had a wonderful friend, Nick Hoff. I didn't have even a laptop at that time. And he helped me compile everything and write the whole thing. We had a wonderful time. I gave him $500. I took $500, but I paid for all our meals. And he was above China. He had an apartment above Chinatown. And so we would go twice a week. I think we worked for 4 hours and then go and have dinner in Chinatown. And it was a very, like the Arboretum Cycle, it was a very special period writing that book. And people love the book. It's, people all around the world write to me about it.
It's been translated into many languages, yes?
Yeah, lately Croatian.
Croatian, right. Well, because you were in Croatia presenting your films.
No, my films are being presented, but I was not there.
Oh, you weren't there, right.
Yeah.
So it's about how you can have a religious experience looking at film, not religion in the traditional sense, but as a kind of transformative experience. And how does this relate to Buddhism? Because I think that you are a practicing Buddhist.
Okay. This is a big topic. Buddhism, the book had a kind of a secret agenda. It was really to combine the lineage in the West of genius with let's say, the more Buddhist idea of enlightenment. And so it's never said as such in the book, but that was the underpinnings, is to show, and from my own point of view, the similarities between the Western sense of genius and the Eastern sense of enlightenment. In a way, you could say that the Buddha was a genius, so there's that aspect of devotional cinema. In terms of my own films, I think where Buddhism plays a part is not in terms of the story that Buddhism tells of what reality is, not that, but it has to do with a lot about lying. I don't understand. I think like anyone, I lie to myself because I'm a little lazy. And in a certain way, I'm not lazy. I work very hard. I enjoy working on my films. But there's something a little bit lazy. Lazy means you see something and it doesn't quite work, but you skip over it, and then so filmmaking and film editing, a lot of it has to do with honesty. You have to watch at what point you're being lazy. and fooling yourself. And I don't know, working with film I find very, very interesting, very clarifying in terms of self-deception and so forth, because you get very concrete feedback, you know, from the work. It's not working or it's working and so forth.
Yeah, I want to also mention, let's move along, Catherine, because we're kind of running out of time. But I want to mention that you have always resisted the idea of digitizing your films. They can only be seen as films, 16mm films.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
yes, but recently, in the last few years, you have extracted film stills and presented them as, you know, in a frame on a wall. I think you've had now two exhibitions at Peter Bloom's gallery in New York, and also here in San Francisco at Paula Anglum and Anglum Gilbert. So what was it that made you interested in doing that, or had it ever been proposed before and you didn't want to do it, but then finally you accepted the idea of doing it?
Well, in each case, it was offered to me. And in terms of the stills, in fact, it was at a New Year's Eve. I never go to a party, much less a New Year's Eve party. It's the last thing I'd ever do.
It's at my house, actually.
Yeah, but the only one I ever went to in my adult life was at your house. And I was shy because there were all these art world, museum type people, well dressed. And, you know, the thing Bill and I joke around about how artists are the animals and the curators are the zookeepers. You know, and so it was a party made up of animals and zookeepers. So I went like an animal. I went off into the side, behind the punch bowl, into the shadows, like cows under a tree on a hot day, right? And there I met a very nice and friendly woman named Nina Zurier, whose husband is a well-known painter, John, who also shows up at the Bloom. And I said to her, we were just talking, and she said, "Why don't you come over sometime? I have a wonderful printer, color printer, and we could just try to scan a few of your images and see how they look." And so that seemed really nice. The Epilogue doesn't relate to that. Anyway, oh gosh. So. And then another coincidence happened. Peter Bloom had come out to California to look at John's paintings to plan a show, and he saw some of the stills. It's like a Judy Garland sprained ankle moment. And he said, "What are these?" And anyway, that led to having the show at Peter Bloom. And I wasn't sure about the whole project, but it looked beautiful, and he hung it beautifully. I was very impressed. He never did anything corny. Every decision was a visual decision, an intelligent visual decision. I was very impressed by that. And then we did another show as part of the Freeze, one of those Freeze things.
Yeah.
And where we did just 7 images from the Arboretum series. You know, and that turned out really beautifully. The other thing you mentioned was, is that MOMA in New York was doing, unfortunately, the COVID.
Are we going to talk about the MoMA installation?
Yeah, should I wait?
Wait, let's go to Epilogues first. The next one, Catherine?
Yeah.
And the next one, which is the interior. These are not film stills, but these are snapshots that you made with your camera. I mean, your phone.
What happened in truth is COVID has just knocked the calendar out of my brain. Last summer, 2 summers ago, whatever, I had a hernia operation. And I realized that 6 weeks, I couldn't carry the Bolex around.
Yeah.
You know, what am I going to do? You know, what am I going to do with myself? So I was looking on my laptop of just my photo album, of snapshots I'd taken with my telephone, so to speak. And I made an appointment with Nina. I said, Nina, could we just as an experiment take 10 images or something, just from my snaps and just see how they print? And I sat down with her and she says, this would make a better book than a show. So we worked on it, and she was a very experienced book designer for many museums and so forth. So that went very smoothly, and that was a real joy. And then Peter Bloom heard about it and said, I want to put out an edition on it. Yeah, I'm still working on it in a way. Yeah.
And the next slide.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh,
So
this is
that's an interior view of the book.
Yeah. I was working, it's the subtitle of it is called Letters and Correspondence. And the pun on correspondence is that there's always one of the articulations is left to right, right to left between each spread in the book.
Right.
It was very hard to make each spread resonate in some kind of way that was visually poetic.
And there's no text, right?
Yeah, there's no text. It just says Jerome is the only text. Because Peter called up. He says, Nathaniel, I had an idea. Let's have a quote at the beginning of the book. And I said, Peter, you know what? I already thought of that. In fact, I found some. But you know what? That gives the audience an escape. Then, like, all these images are supposed to represent the idea in the quote. And it's already a closure, a closing down, a conceptual thing. I wanted it to be very open. What it is I love books of hours and so forth. I wanted to make a book. Sometimes I really like to sit down and read something, but I don't want to read words. So it was an attempt to make a book where you could sit down and, in an armchair, so to speak, and slowly enjoy the page turns. And, but the whole thing was just visual. There's no escape route. I even thought, you could have a glossary at the back. Page. So I didn't even want page numbers. I didn't want anything that said book or art book. I want it to be more like a book of hours, more something that produce a prayerful state rather than information.
Which is, in a way, consistent with the way you make your films. It makes perfect sense. So let's end with this MoMA, a couple of images from. No, that's obviously another one from the book. And now here, there are two images from some of you may have seen this, New Yorkers. This was at the Museum of Modern Art.
COVID knocked us out.
Yes. And it's the first time that you have had any of your films digitized. So talk about this installation, which I think is a unique in your work. You have never done anything like this before.
Well, I made this film in the earlier mid-'80s called 17 Reasons Why, which is a sign on the top of a thrift store in the Mission District of San Francisco. And I made it all with regular 8mm cameras that maybe none of them cost more than $2. Some of them cost 50 cents. And they had whole boxes of them. People at that point had turned their back on 8mm. And so I decided to make a whole film just with these 8mm cameras. But regular 8mm is the same size as 16mm, but it has twice as many perforations. But if you don't slit it, it doesn't become 8mm. It stays 16mm with 4 8mm images. Anyway, that's a big thing to explain. But so MoMA was doing a show on celebrating home movies, and which was wonderful, beautifully presented. And they said they wanted to use my film, 17 Reasons Why, which they had in their collection. They had come upon it in doing research as I don't know what you call it, the logo film. It was the film on the top of the escalator before you go down. And I said, you can't do it. It won't look good. You can't. And I had heard from many people that you can't do silent speed on a digital medium. That, for instance, you can't make a Blu-ray in silent speed. So, but they said they could. And they said, okay, well, so then I got curious. And They went to a very good place in I think in Pittsburgh, in Pennsylvania. Anyway, it looked pretty good. It doesn't look as good as film, but it's different. You know, film is like cotton, and you know, the digital's a little like Dacron. Do you remember Dacron?
I remember Dacron.
Not before your time, too.
I think there's another, I think, Catherine, there's one more image of this. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it really did work well, but it was totally unexpected.
Yeah. You know what was thrilling to me, what convinced me? You see the shot we're seeing now. Well, over to the right, you go down that little hallway, and there's the original stairway of MoMA from the 40s that had the mobile, and right. And I looked over there, and I had gone up that stairway as a 5-year-old. You know, going to see with my parents every Saturday. We went to the museum, and the idea that I was going to be showing. I looked over at that stairway and looked back, and I said, "Okay, I'll do it." You know, there's just something about completing your life in some way. You know, having from a childhood place of great admiration, and then suddenly you're participating in it. And they couldn't do it as film because they were showing it again and again. You know, would destroy the film and so forth. They did a very nice job. You know, it had its own beauty. It's not as beautiful, but it has its own beauty. Yeah.
And this is a film that they own, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, it's in their collection. So I think we should stop now because we filled our hour and more, and open to questions. But before that, I just wanted to read something very short that I think is so beautiful, written by films have what Edmund Denby called a passion for the lost chord. Nick makes it the job of his otherwise dumb recording devices, the camera and film stock, on through the projector and across the screen to find, reveal, or simply make this happen, not just nice moments of footage, but with a sustained sweep that makes 20 minutes of your life coherent, mysterious, melodious, and surprisingly sane. Thanks, Nick. So do we have questions, and who is going to handle that? Is that you, Catherine?
I'll be taking care of it. Thank you so much,
good.
Nick and Connie. That was a wonderful conversation.
I wish I'd done better. Let's do it again.
Maybe we'll have to have part 2 later.
Yeah.
So our first question comes from Steve Silberman. You should be able to turn on your mic now, Steve.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Nick, hi. I actually saw you at the Waverly Diner in November, the last time we were both in New York. But in any case, when I was a teenager, I saw a documentary called Word Is Out, which was one of the first films in which gay people spoke for themselves without shame. And the person in the film who I most related to was you. And your interview had a tremendously liberating effect on my life. It was very early for gay people, other than, say, Allen Ginsberg, who was actually a teacher of mine, to just be frank and out about their gayness. I'm wondering what effect appearing in that film had on your life.
Horrifying.
Was it?
Well, no, it was very scary. It was so scary. It was so scary, you know. And then my family, you know, then your family sees it, you know, not your, you know, your cousins and all this, and shows. I haven't been a family man since.
Oh, really?
No, I'm a little. I don't know. It was terrifying. It's maybe hard to imagine now. You know, it would just be ho-hum. But I want to congratulate America. I mean, we learned to use seatbelts, right? And gay people became acceptable. They weren't just sort of sick and weak. And I really thank America for that transition in my lifetime. That you could just be a human being and with every other human being.
Yeah. Thanks, Nick.
Yeah.
Thank you, Steve. And thank you, Nick. Our second question comes from S.A. Aguillon Mata. Hopefully I'm saying your name correctly. You should be able to turn on your mic now.
Hi.
Are you related to the painter?
Okay, thank you for the conversation. It was great. And I just got stuck in the beginning of the talk. And I remember we start with the question of what is experimental filmmaking or experimental cinema from your point of view. And you referred to the question of genre and the examples of literature, right? And I just started thinking about it. It reminded me of a conference, 1960s and 70s conference by Svel Sardu, in which he, Cuban poet, in which he talks about an idea by Roland Barthes, which is, and I'm translating in my head, so forgive me for the hesitation, but it's something like, the regime of sense is that of the restrained freedom, right? And I was thinking, the literary genres on their own, they have the burden of their own rules, right? And then independently, every piece or every text, understanding that your films can be also a text, have the so to speak, the burden of their own, I guess, internal logic, right? But when you break free of the genre and you are just thinking about the internal logic of your text, is it a problem for you to suddenly find yourself in a place of absolute, or not absolute, but kind of like major freedom, so to speak, in which the regime of sense might be, you know, put into question because there's just too little to grab conceptually? I don't know if I'm making sense in your view. Let me know.
I honestly don't understand. You know, I know that making films outside the marketplace allows you to trust and love, for one thing. You know, that you could love your audience and offer them the experience of love. You know, I don't think you can. That's always tainted when it has to do with recoupment, or often. Right. Of course, there's supreme geniuses in the narrative form who could function within the business of film and making film at the same time. Maybe I don't have that scope, but anyways, I don't have enough power or freedom to work within the industry. But I don't know, I have friends who I've grown up with all my life who work in the industry and are successful directors, but they don't seem to have that much freedom, even if they're very successful.
Yeah.
So there's something wonderful about being able to touch the most intimate thing in your heart, the most tender feeling about could be, you know, just the way the light's coming in on some windowsill or something, and share that with people. Because cinema, I want to offer something for people that I don't know, I think of myself, I wish someone would make a film that I could really enjoy, you know, that wasn't just part of pop culture in some way. Right. You know? I don't know I don't think, are you related to the painter?
To the painter?
Yeah, Mata?
Oh, no.
No.
No, I'm not. It's a convoluted question, but anyway, thank you.
Yeah.
Do we have time for another question?
We have one more question, and it is going to come from our publisher, Fong.
Oh, Fong.
Fong, you should be able to activate your mic now.
Thank you, Louis. Thank you, Nick.
Where are you?
I'm in Greenpoint, Brooklyn.
Oh, I see. And now you're on the bottom of the screen.
Yes.
Yeah. Is that in a more expensive seat? You're up front.
I've been zooming in so many days, so many times, so many hours. My eyes failing me. But Nick, you say earlier, I'm a huge fan of your work, and I love devotional cinema. You say earlier a beautiful phrase, trends of eros. And I just wonder how much, which is so much about your work, you know, trends of eros. And I wonder how much of the psychedelic renaissance, because I spent a lot of time watching a lot of Jonas Makers films, because I'm planning to curate a huge retrospective of his film. And I'm sort of involved in being on the board of Anthology Film Archives and whatnot. But, you know, he never really did any drugs. He can't even smoke pot, poor man. I'm asking that how much of psychedelic renaissance, you know, the whole Timothy Leary and Richard Alpert have so to do with your early formation.
Well, I can say in 1964, a friend who had gotten those acid sugar cubes, you know, at the University of Chicago, once brought them over to anyway, we're out in New Jersey, and we spent the most memorable day of my life, you know, doing an acid trip with this old friend in a forest. And I had, that changed. I mean, I was already that kind of person. You know, I was reading, you know, haiku and things on Zen and all that kind of stuff. But all I knew is that when the day began, we were going into the woods in New Jersey on a Thursday afternoon that was drizzling, or morning. And by the end of the day, we were no longer in New Jersey, and, you know, and so forth. And I think anyone who's, I don't know, I'm not talking about the pop culture sense of LSD or acid, but yeah, I think anyone who's had that experience is forever changed. And maybe it's more of a confirmation, you know. It also caused a lot of confusion because you weren't up to everything that you experienced.
Thank you.
Mm.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for your questions in the chat. At the Rail, we have a tradition of ending lunch with a poem, and we've carried that into these community events. So today I'm thrilled to welcome the poet Patricia Spears Jones to the stage. Patricia Spears Jones is a poet, cultural activist, anthologist, and recipient of the 2017 Jackson Poetry Prize, and is author of A Lucent Fire, New and Selected Poems, and 3 other full-length collections, and 5 chapbooks. She curated programs at the Poetry Project of St. Mark's Church and created Words Sunday series in Brooklyn. She is Emeritus Fellow for Black Earth Institute and organizer of the American Poets Congress. Patricia, you should be able to activate your mic now. Welcome. You just have to click the invitation on your screen. There we go. Welcome.
Wow, well, what an interesting conversation and what beautiful images. The only thing I'm sad about was that they weren't moving because when I think of cinema, I think of things moving. Today, John Lewis was laid to rest, finally, after a long and interesting trip in his casket across the South and into Washington and back again. And so this is a poem not written for him, but written out of the experiences of the civil rights movement and about change. It's called Subsequent to Thomas Sayers Ellis. Thomas is a good friend of mine. He's a wonderful poet and musician. And this was written several years ago. And it's a little strange. So I hope that everybody will follow me on it. And it's in my book, Lucent Fire. Subsequent to Thomas Sayers Ellis. Grief list of unnamed dead. 4:50 a.m. red lights me thus, quote, and later the Foucault-inspired remnants of a federal bureau, the power visible in an ink stamp and laundry allowance, I write. Laundry allowance? Foucault? Reading Taylor Branch's Pillar of Fire, Murderous White Men. spat out their snake-like tobacco spit on blacks, full citizenship and justice curse at country clubs where Southern governors can't charm their way out of a future they know won't respect them. Bureaucrats record, write file after file, the power visible. Shiny brown FBI shoes, old Zappa, Federal Bureau Foucault inspired. Armed struggle or nonviolent confrontation. Ideas collide across dining room tables, early audio tapes positioned in the Negro churches where the workers, civil, young, enraged, sign people up, eager or weary enough to go down to the county courthouse to register to vote. From want of courtesy, these people receive scorn and a persistent violence naked but for the white ladies who might pass the parade of Negro citizens demanding their due. Negro citizens' monuments are scattered across the county, in the pastures, by riverbeds, on the jail cells floors, where bodies, quote, showed up, unquote, or were cut down, swung suicide. Negro citizens' voices prayed or sang or damned their murderers, smug whites, to what looked like the homes of the poorest sharecroppers, poor whites, no doors, no windows, dirt floors, a stove where no wood or coal could make the damp go away, house on the farthest road in the deepest wood where the devil found inhabitants unsuitable for the hottest regions of hell. I'm a great believer in curses. I really am. And that is one of my few poems that has a curse in it. Here's one that sort of gives me the power of Betty Saar. I was going to read something else, but this is Betty Saar's birthday today. After Betty Saar's mystic chart for the unemployed sorceress, and another Californian, okay, so all you California people, this is for you. My runes are in ruins. Little laughter here for my sarcasm. What to do? This chart confuses, conflates moon, which fades in honey, local or from some exotic shore, and what of money, my savings stuffed beneath deflating mattress each cold day warns me that my resume is unworthy. Who will hire me now that my spells are so easily broken? My warnings useless. It is a wonder that I worked as long as I could. Incantations memorized and recipes for spells written in an ink too pale for visibility. Each item sourced, the medicine worked, and then it did not. Was it the well of stories drying up, the fish scales sinking the kitchen table, the cat wandering away while spiders spread their cosmic maps, unreadable to all but the other spiders? They cheer me. Again, I read the signs. Oh, how the signs obscure true knowledge, and I am blazed in this dark room, hungry and cold and searching. Who is this thief, and why has she cast this curse? What must I do to bring runes from my parched throat, medicine back to my pockets? Thank you, Broken Rail, for letting me join this lovely day.
Thank you so much, Patricia. That was amazing. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Connie. Thank you, everyone in the audience, for attending. This has been a wonderful conversation, a wonderful event. Please join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. for a conversation between the painters Judith Bernstein and E.J. Hauser. And I will let everyone turn on their microphones and say goodbye as they leave.
Goodbye.
Thanks,
everyone.
Connie. Thanks, Nick.
Thank you,
Patricia. Great poem.
Thank
Happy
you.
birthday, Betty.
Thanks,
Sorry.
Nick.
Bye. Thank you.
Good to see you, Steve. Thanks for joining.
Thanks, Nick.
Hi.
Bye, Nick.
Thank you, Nick, and thank you, Nick.
I
Hi,
see.
Steve.
I hope to see you in movies. I hope to see
Hey, Ann. Hey, Emma.
Thank you. Hey, Steve. Hello.
Bye.
Hi,
Hey, Aaron. Good to see you.
Nick.